Okay, I'm going to try to present to you what I think is happening, and I'm going to use what's called the Hegelian dialectic, and that is the creation of a thesis, an antithesis, and waiting for the outcome, which is the synthesis. So let's begin in the upper left corner with the thesis. Notice I use the word create, and in parentheses I use manufacture. So that's the terminology that came out of the early 1900s and those who understood the great power of the media. At that time it simply would have been film, and then eventually it would have been radio, but you also had your newspapers and magazines, okay? So those who are in control can create a crisis. Now notice I have in there, it is a media event. As one book mentioned, it's a media atrocity. It's a media crisis. It's completely media. But in your mind you accept it as reality. So that brings me to the word below it. Real. It's real time. R-E-E-L. Not R-E-A-L. And I hope to do a video on that, so stay tuned to this channel. Alright, so we're going to go up over to the other corner, and we're going to look at the antithesis, which would be the reaction. Let the public respond, but help the response. In other words, create more videos and more articles on the newspaper and more things in magazines. It's everywhere about how deadly this virus is and the things you can do to, quote, protect yourself, and on and on and on it goes. Oh, we just happened to have somebody with a cell phone that captured this video of these people fighting over toilet paper. Here's a camera in the store that catches a woman buying $100 worth of toilet paper. Not really. Basically, you're seeing actors who are presenting to you responses that are once again manufactured or created to help allow you to do the same, to help allow you to panic about toilet paper, to help create in you maybe a fight or an argument with somebody at the store about meat on the shelf or whatever. So they are also controlling the reaction. They are controlling the antithesis. They are helping the public, leading them along to a false response to a false crisis. Now, where does that leave you? Well, once those two things kind of crash with one another, and it's a lot like two poles, the poles of positive, negative, or yin and yang, or it's the dualism of mystery religion, it's the two pillars in Masonic literature and practices and secret rituals. Okay, so you take these two poles, you take a thesis and an antithesis, and allow the two of them to interact and allow people to react and to respond. So what does that bring you? That brings you a synthesis, or that brings you an outcome. Now, the outcome, as what we're seeing, is total fear, panic, people isolating themselves, paranoia about anything and everything. But that's not really the actual desired outcome. You're starting to see it right now in the news, the false news, the fake news, all the phony news, which everything is infiltrated and everything is infected with falsehood. Magazines, newspapers, radio stations, television stations, you name it. Whatever you think is safe for news, you're wrong. You're wrong. Okay, so everything is giving you the synthesis. What is the synthesis? Well, we need a Savior. We need a deliverer. We need a Moses. We need some of the judges, like in the Old Testament book of Judges. Who can deliver us from this craziness? Well, guess what? You know who the Savior is? Well, of course, it's only the government. The government now is gone into war mode. Why? Because the government wants to put a huge debt onto straw men and straw women. Now, what do I mean by straw men and straw women? You have one. Get your driver's license out, look at it, your name is in all capital letters. Anything and everything with certificates and license and so forth is capital letters. That is a corporation. It is a corpse with an oration. That's right, you have a shadow that follows you throughout life, birth, life, and even death. And let me tell you, the shadow still continues even at death. That you became a corporation, whether you liked it or not. Now, I certainly didn't like it, and I certainly didn't even know about it until a few years ago. But anyhow, the corpse with the orations, that's the definition of corporation. And your driver's license, that thing on your driver's license is not you. That's a corpse with an oration. And that is the one who's vulnerable in the hoax system. All right? So, well, what happens is when the government starts handing out money like candy on Halloween, and the government starts supplying all these wonderful things like rain suits and masks and research on a phony virus, then that creates huge debt. Now that leads me to my next possible thesis here that I'm going to present to you, that it might actually be that we are seeing the fulfillment of the 80-year war cycle. So what do you mean? Well, if you get my video and take a look at it, I present the thesis and the idea that all of history so far has been under an 80-year war cycle in the United States. Now, granted, there are other wars that don't fit into it, and I've got some ideas on that, and I'm working on it. That's the #1 comment people make. Yes, I'm onto it, and I'm working on it. But I can only handle one war cycle at a time, all right? Let's just stay with this one. Stay with me. It's 80 years the war hoaxing occurs. So you have the end of the American Revolution hoax, 1781. It ends. Treaty of Paris is not till 1783, but we're going to use the actual end of the hoax. Add 80, what do we get? 1861. And that brings us to the Civil War hoax, all right? It's real simple. That takes us to the Civil War hoax, 1861. All right, let's get rid of that hoax. And let's add 80 to 1861. That brings us to 2021, which I was saying in my video, which I made about 2 years ago, I believe, that we're due for something. And I even have another video that actually says about 2021, possible Third World War. And that still is a possibility that this might be just a minor hoax, in the sense leading to a bigger hoax, maybe a war with, quote, China, our enemies. Even though like 90% of what you buy in the stores that you attend might be coming from China. But who knows, we might end up in a hoax war with China over this, because the virus started in China, supposedly. It's all nonsense. But anyhow, 2021, a war, and this is sort of a new concept for folks in their minds, but it's really not a new thing at all. There's not just simply war that involves bombs and bullets and machine guns and grenades and all that stuff. There's other kinds of wars, and this could be one of those other kind of war, namely a war on a virus. So this is just a proposal that possibly the 80-year war cycle is actually unfolding right before us, and the war is possibly a war on a virus. We're seeing manufacturing plants now manufacturing a whole bunch of junk. And that's what happens in war, by the way, even the wars with the bullets and the bombs and all that. Yeah, some of it's used for target practice. Some of it's distributed and people waste it for crazy reasons. But for the most part, it all ends up somewhere like a junkyard. It all ends up in disposal mode. That's why you had your war surplus stores that were still around when I grew up. They were selling World War II junk in war surplus stores because there was so much of it manufactured. They had to get rid of it somehow, and some people bought it up and made a living out of it. But basically, most of it just ends up somewhere in a junkyard or buried in big heaps somewhere. And that would make for another good video, by the way, but we'll just stay with this one. The 80-year war cycle. Possibly it is the virus hoax. So let's go back and take one more look at it real quickly. And that is, we're going to look at the fact that we've been confronted with a thesis, a phony virus, which is just simply the common cold, an antithesis, which is the Republic panicking, and then a synthesis, which is simply government expenditure to help comfort and fight the fears and panic of people, and then the huge debt is created, and then that takes us over once again to the idea of the 80-year war cycle, that basically the 80-year war cycle is an economic cycle, and it's a cycle of spending huge amounts and then taking the debt that you spent, all the money you spent on all this junk, and then putting it on the heads of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Who knows, I might have been living my life to pay off the debt of World War II. And I think maybe my mother and her folks were paying off the debt of World War I and Spanish-American war hoax and all that stuff. But anyhow, these debts are thrown on your head, my head, but not really. It's thrown on the heads of the corpse with the oration, or the little corporations that nobody, hardly anybody, is thinking about. Yes, that would be the one that follows you through your whole life. Yes, that's the one that's been following me my whole life. And this is a summary presented to you by War Backwards is Raw. Thank you for watching. End of video.